Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Publica. In the episode of today, I will talk about the 1930s and the 1940s in Europe, and specifically I will focus on the relation between anti-fascism and anti-colonialism through these years, and the relation between the Spanish exiles who fled from Spain in 1939 and went to Algeria, and how they relate with the Arabs from Algeria, this relation between anti-fascism on the one hand and anti-colonialism on the other. The Arabs from Algeria were fighting first to get the independence from France. However, when 1936 came, the idea of anti-colonialism got behind the fight against fascism, and this was because the Arab movement for independence was managed initially by the French Communist Party, which in 1920, when it was created, adopted a perspective which was clearly anti-colonialist. But in 1935, with the invasion of Italy to Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, by the troops of Mussolini, and with the start of the Spanish Civil War, the Communist Party all over the world changed their view. The Algerian Communist Party was born months later after the coup d'etat carried on by Franco, and yet it was born with the idea of fighting against fascism. And we will see how there are some inner contradictions between these two fights. For example, the future Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, pointed how the white left-wing Europeans were hypocrites because they were fighting against fascism, and at the same time they were not able to criticize the British Empire, which was oppressing India, the French Empire, who had the colonies in Algeria, Indochina, and so on. And for Nehru and for many other non-white people, the relation between fascism and imperialism was so clear that not seeing that relation, it was because they had hidden interests within it. So, for example, British left-wing anti-fascist people, they were not as keen to speak against their own country, Britain, for instance, as against Spain, Italy, and Germany. So, starting by the Spanish Civil War, as we perfectly know, the conflict that was fought in Spanish soil from 1939 until 1936 until 1939 represent an ideological battle fought on an international level. This was not a war between brothers and sisters, but you had here different forces fighting, and which was known as the preamble for the World War II. According to Paul Preston, the famous Hispanic historian, he's British, but he has an extensive knowledge about the Spanish modern history. Without the Spanish Civil War, there would have not been World War II, because Hitler, Mussolini sent their armies there. Nazi Germany bombed Guernica, so they experimented with all the weapons there in Spain. So it was a prelude of what was going to happen just in 1939, like some months later of the end of the Civil War. But also the policies carried by the Franco's ally, the so-called doctors and so on, which they rationalize how the Reds had bad blood and they had to be eradicated. This was later on implemented by people like Goebbels in Germany. So the final solution and all those racist policies carried on by Hitler in an upper level was first implemented by the Spanish Nationalist Army, which had the support of the clergy and of the most reactionary elements. So Spain was unfortunately a preamble for the World War II. In Spain, the international brigades organized by the Soviet Union arrived to the country to help the Republic against General Franco, who received the support, as I already said, of Italy and Germany. The fact that Stalin, Mussolini, or Hitler sent their armies to fight in Spain served to cement the visions that an ideological extreme battle was taking place there. Erich Hobsbawm, the famous historian of Berbeck, defined the Spanish Civil War as the quintessential expression of a global confrontation between fascism and democracy. This was seen through those years under those lens. It was a republic, democratically elected by the people. The Popular Front has won the elections in 1936 due to the popular vote. However, the right-wing reactionaries could not wait for next election, and they decided to take the power by force. So again, it was fascism, specified mostly in Mussolini and Hitler, and Franco has been defined his ideology as a kind of ultra-nationalist, which for Paul Preston, again, it was worse than fascism implemented by Mussolini against a democratic republic. Since the start of the conflict in 1936, thousands of people started to flee the country and became exiles. France, Mexico, Algeria, and the Soviet Union became the most common destinies of the refugees. In fact, in April 1939, and according to the historian Javier Rubio, which was the first to study in the 1960s, 70s, the Spanish exile, was of 450. For those, 430,000 had gone to France and 12,000 to Algeria. Some months later of April, the World War II started, and at that time, hundreds of thousands of Spanish were in exile, suffering deprivation. In France and North Africa, the places where there was the majority of the Spanish exiles, they were held in concentration camps. Having fought for the Spanish Republic during 3 years, many of them kept involved in the struggle against fascism after they were liberated. The case in Algeria is particularly interesting, is well known as the one in France, because the current of anti-fascism and anti-colonialism enmeshed in different ways. For some Spanish exiles, for instance, both struggles were interlinked. And likewise, for the Arabs from Algeria, who many of them have fought in Spain against Franco's army under the international brigades, they believe that defeating fascism will mean to achieve independence from France. So, in other words, for the Spanish, the fight against fascism, which they had carried in Spain, it will help them later to win the World War II for the Allies and give themselves legitimacy to force the international community to overthrow Franco in Spain, as it happened in Italy and Germany with his allies Mussolini and Hitler. For the Arabs from Algeria, their involvement both in World War II and World War I, it would help, they thought, to cement their pretensions to have an independent state. In that sense, Churchill and Roosevelt signed the Atlantic Charter in 1941, in which they assured that every people had the right to decide their own government, their own nation. In other words, both the Spanish and the Arabs believe in their premises and the fight created by the Allies, and both of them were disappointed at the end. The thing is, like, even though many people relate anti-fascism with anti-colonialism, this relation was not so straightforward as it could seem, as I mentioned at the beginning. In the final years of World War II, 1944, 1945, the Arabs and the Spanish exiles took advantage of the global juncture to appeal to the international community to achieve their aims. The former wanted the independence from France, and the latter to overthrow Franco's dictatorship. I will continue talking about their different approaches taken in the 1940s and how the global situation shaped the action of both the Spanish and the Arabs. In order to understand that, I want to give a kind of analysis about the arrival of the Spanish exiles to Algeria, how they were received by the people there, the relations between the Spanish and the Arabs in 1939, 1940s, the perspective that they took, the different political organizations that were in exile, the time of liberation in 1943, and so on. But I will talk about that in different episodes because I think there is too much to exposed here. So next episode I will start from 1939. Also the relation between the Arabs and the Spanish fight against fascism, and the final conclusion. All of this will be in the next episode.